The Five Rings Podcast, Road to Tokyo on the Sport Podcasting Network. Your weekly fix leading up to the 2020 Olympic Games with Duane Rollins and Kevin Laramée. Follow us and listen to us live on Twitter at Five Rings Podcast and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network for more content.
Good day, good night. Welcome to the Five Rings Podcast. Yes, the road to Tokyo might be a little longer than expected, but it doesn't mean that it has to be a boring one. And to start our longer march towards Tokyo 2020, happening in 2021, joining us CEO and General Secretary of USA Weightlifting, Mr. Phil Andrews, joins us to talk about the culture of USA Weightlifting and more in these difficult times. But first of all, Mr. Andrews, how are you today?
Not too bad. And yourself? It's a sunny morning here in Denver, Colorado.
It's also sunny where I am in Toronto, Canada. So hopefully it's sunny wherever you are. I'll be cheery here. What wasn't as cheery is back in the spring when this virus took out the Olympic Games, something that we would have thought was unthinkable. You know, I was thinking of this when I'm hearing the intro, the road to 2020. Of course, the road to still the Tokyo 2020 Games, but it's in 2021. I know it's probably a very big question to ask, but let's start with just that one. How much of a challenge is it, and has it been, to try and completely refocus a national sport organization that relies so much on those 4-year Olympic cycles? How much of a challenge has it been?
Huge, no question about that. When we have some advantages in weightlifting that perhaps other sports don't. It's very difficult to do wrestling, for example, on your own. Whereas weightlifting, you can, if you have a garage or you have a space where you could personally use that is not a gym, you can practice the sport of weightlifting right there. So we've been helped by that for our elite athletes, those who would have appeared in 2020. I think a big issue has been motivating everybody to continue on for a year and at the same pace that they were, especially being so close to qualifying for the games. And then in the wider sense, it's been a very challenging time for the organization. I'm proud to say we've come through it, I think, reasonably well through a number of strategies that I'm happy to go into as an organization. The US is slightly different to the rest of the world in that we rely primarily on ourselves to generate our income. And so therefore we've had to deal with the commercial reality of COVID-19 as well as the issues arising from the Olympics. So, ultimately, when you're an Olympic organization, your 4 years are focused on one event. And indeed, the challenge perhaps now becomes, as we talk today, I'm not sure quite when this will air, but we're talking on a day when we, in theory, should be in Tokyo. As we look ahead for a year now, we, at this time, should be turning our head towards Paris. So that's another issue to balance is, okay, well, how do we balance a 5th year of the Tokyo quadrennial whilst also looking ahead to the Paris 2024 Olympic Games and preparing our team for both qualification and obviously participation, hopefully, in Paris. Lots of challenges, and I've given you a very, very broad answer there because there's been so many things that COVID-19 has affected. Not just at the elite level of the Kate Nyes and the Sarah Robles and the CJ Cummings of this world, but also right down to the everyday weightlifter who's just going into the gym, who might be age 55 or what have you, who's doing the sport for the love of the sport as opposed to for any particular competitive reason or certainly at the highest levels. It's affected sport all the way through those levels. So happy to go into it a little bit more, but you're right. It's a very big question. We've coped probably better than most. We've kept our athletes funded. We've kept our employees employed. We've had some online competitions. We've had some online camps. We've done some innovative things to try and keep everything moving. But ultimately, it is a huge challenge when you have the very thing you're absolutely focused on moves 1 year. And of course, much as we hate to talk about it, there's no guarantee that it will happen next year. We certainly very much hope it does. it is a huge challenge, not just commercially or as the business of USA Weightlifting goes, or even the performance side, but also reasonably emotionally for the athletes, for the coaches, and even for the fans of the Olympic Games.
Precisely. Yeah, this will air during the scheduled Olympic period. So, this is our first show that we've done when we should have been doing them daily, talking about results, but instead we're talking about this still. But hopefully, as you say, this will continue on ahead. I'm glad you brought up the sort of grassroots and the recreational side of any sport. I worry more about that than the Olympians in many ways. The Olympians will find a way. They're very resilient people. They just are, but by virtue of where they are. How is it affecting your sport at a grassroots level, and what kind of provisions are you doing to try and make sure that you'll come out of this strong at the end?
So, I mean, defining grassroots obviously is part of that challenge. We've had a huge range of activities. I think we have lost membership. So the way that national governing bodies work in the US is that you become a member and you use that membership to then go and compete. Yes, our membership has gone down, but from what I've understood from other national governing bodies, less so than others. And what's really happening and what we're seeing is we're retaining members reasonably well. In other words, people are renewing their memberships in USA Weightlifting, but what we're not seeing is new members coming in, which makes total sense. If gyms aren't open, you can't walk into a gym and 3 months later go and compete for the first time in sport of weightlifting. And of course, that will continue to have an effect because a sport like ours gets a really good amount of TV exposure once every 4 years. And people will go, that looks like something I might like to have a try at. They go to their gym, and 3 months later, they might go to a competition. You're probably thinking, well, that's your future Olympian, right? Not necessarily. That could be somebody who just wants to give it a go, wants to get stronger, wants to get fitter, maybe just wants to get off the couch. And that's the lifeblood of really our sport. So what have we really done in the last few months to help? We put on, from the very first day we shut down on March 12th, we put on online competitions. So people who had access to garage equipment could go into a garage and compete. And we were very flexible. Normally we compete only in kilos. We allowed pounds for that competition. We were very flexible on the way that competition worked. And then that's judged remotely by national and international level referees around the country. So you might have somebody competing in New York who might be judged by somebody in Los Angeles, a second person in Seattle, and a third person in Dallas, Texas, for example. We've actually just recently competed internationally. I'm also the Director General of the Pan American Weightlifting Federation, and right now the Interim Director General of the International Weightlifting Federation, which I can go into those roles later if you like. But we just done our first international competition as well, where we competed against Colombia and Peru and Brazil and other Pan American nations, and indeed Canada was one of those in a Pan American online competition. But that's more getting back towards the elite level. What else have we done? We've had online camps for our masters level. The masters in our sport is 35 and above, as well as the youth and the juniors. We've moved a lot of our education online because people are sitting at home with, I don't want to say nothing to do, but with more time on their hands than they perhaps had before, and are able to fit in an online training course. So we're educating coaches up and down the country. We've done technique clinics for our sort of, if you like, youth coaches or entry-level coaches. We've actually done that with the national teams as well to do online selection even for one championship that we still have on the calendar right now. Whether it remains is another question. So when this first started, we also went out to our gyms. We have 1,300 member gyms across the country and really started to share best practices of how we're going to keep people engaged. A lot of that came down to Zoom classes, online workouts people can do at home, and we did that ourselves as well. We still produce 3 times a week a body weight workout that you can do at home in your own house, even if you have no equipment. We kept people engaged a little bit via Instagram. We did the Keep Lifting Instagram campaign. I was, interestingly enough, the first participant in. Basically, find a household implement and do a lift with it. And most of that was the front squat. It was fun. That was right at the beginning of COVID-19. And it was designed just to keep people's heads up, to be honest, and keep people motivated. And we had people front squatting their cat, their dog. One person over in Great Britain participated and front squatted a tumble dryer, I believe it was. It might have been a washing machine.
Wow.
So we've done a huge range of things to really just try and keep people interested in the sport, keep people interested in lifting weights, keep people moving as well, whether they have equipment or not, with the hope of getting back into the gym. One comment, I will make is that nobody knew when we started that on March 12th how long this would last. And you and I are talking right at the end of July. And we're now over 4 months in, almost half a year, we've been in this position where we're all, not just USA Weightlifting, but the whole world, dealing with COVID-19. And that's been a struggle. One thing I also mentioned is we did start a fund called the COVID-19 Fund, specifically to keep local gyms operating. And more recently, we've partnered with a company named SnapRaise, who specializes in high school fundraising to drive more funds into those local clubs and keep those gyms alive, especially in states here in the U.S. where they've not been able to reopen successfully.
We often talk about the restaurant industry as an industry that has been really hit hard with COVID-19, and we forget sometimes the health industry, the gym industry, and other aspects like the CrossFit
Absolutely.
gyms and other gyms like weightlifting that have been really affected and still affected as of right now. I want to go back to the beginning of your tenure with USA Weightlifting. Of course, as the times are turbulent now, it was turbulent also when you took over for interim in December 2015. Of course, a sport that has to battle a former reputation. We're not going to lie to anyone here, that has to battle a performance-enhancing drug scandals. I say scandals because there was many over the years. I can go back to Munich all the way to the latest Olympics, and that sport has been
Absolutely
an upward battle. How can you explain to us not only how you were able to double the membership of USA Weightlifting, but also change at least the beginning of a change of a perception of this sport in its own context in the United States?
Well, I think the first thing to say is it's not me, it's us. I've been very fortunate, and this is one of the first things we did. We restructured the office staff and indeed then did a governance review of USA Weightlifting, both of which were tremendously helpful in dictating the culture that we had as a group. The group that we have, or I have around me at USA Weightlifting, is absolutely impeccable, and without whom, we wouldn't be able to do half the things that we have. So that's the first thing to say. Yes, it was a difficult culture, and so we had some issues, though I think we're already on the road to improvement when I took over. That was, as I mentioned, the first thing I did was to restructure the staff and really dictate the culture that we're going to have as one of member service, as one of transparency. And immediately we started to do a lot of things to re-earn trust in the organization. And a lot of what you're talking about comes down to integrity issues around trust in the organization, around anti-doping, et cetera. Some of that's international, and some of that needs to be addressed domestically. So that was the first step, is let's go out and really earn the trust of the people we already have. And those are going to be our best ambassadors, and have been. In terms of how did we change the culture, that's an everyday item. We made some changes in 2016, which made that very quick and have earned the trust that I'm talking about. But it is something that we have to go to battle with every day. We have to do the things we say we're going to do. We have to be transparent about that. We have to explain well. We have to listen to our members, and especially our athletes, in order to be able to really deliver the NGB that people want. I think that's what's really helped us with retention. And of course, when you retain more members, you have a better chance of growing. What's growing us is better access to weightlifting. And I think not only is the change of culture and the way we've marketed ourselves, and all of that helped. And the American Open Series, I think, has been a big part of that. That was a new series which is designed really at the grassroots level. The idea being you walk into a gym, you can put numbers on the wall which are achievable in 3-4 months of training, rather than you go from zero to the national championships or the American Open, what's now the American Open finals, which are very difficult to achieve within even a year, 2, 3, 4 years of training in some cases. Those things have really helped, but you have to also thank CrossFit. CrossFit came along in 2006 and really exploded in 14, 15, 16. And, most in Canada and I'm in the US, most of the time you're in a major city, you are within 5 miles of a CrossFit gym. And what that's done for us is put a barbell into more people's hands than perhaps at any other time in history. And that's really helpful because, of course, some people are going to CrossFit and they're looking at CrossFit and saying, well, actually, I really enjoy the snatch and I really enjoy the clean and jerk. Can I just compete in that? Well, yes, you can. And that's called weightlifting. So we have a lot to thank them for, and I want to be very clear about that. And yes, in 2016 till now, there has been a large change, and I think that crosses over the whole of our sport, the grassroots coaches, the elite coaches, the coaches in the gyms, the athletes especially. And that's probably best summed up in the sort of hashtag we've had for a few years now called It Can Be Done. Because in 2015, 2016, people didn't believe the U.S. could be successful in the Olympic Games, didn't believe that USA Weightlifting could be a successfully run national governing body. And those things, along with other, you can't do this, you can't do that, has certainly been put to bed. And of course, we hope that we'll complete that mission, if you like, in Tokyo in just about a year here. We're hoping for multiple medals, our best Olympic Games in 60 years. I think we have the athletes to do just that. And of course, you did hit the nail on the head that we've had strong doping issues in our sport, and indeed other corruption issues in our sport in recent years, most recently highlighted by the McLaren report. Before that, we had issues raised in 2017 by the International Olympic Committee regarding doping in weightlifting. We elected, or were able to have elected, what is now, or who is now, the IWF interim president, then the vice president, which gave us a degree of a voice in how the sport would be cleaned up, and the ability to participate in that, as well as hosting the 15 World Championships in Houston, Texas, the 17 World Championships where we won our first medals in about 20 years in both genders. One was 23, one was, I think, 15 years. I apologize, 12 years for women it was. And those two events combined really helped us establish ourselves with that international influence. And what is our number one goal? Obviously, our number one goal as USA Weightlifting is to see a cleanup of the sport, and less, if you like, influence of performance-enhancing drugs. And I have to say that situation, whilst it still requires work, has definitely improved in the last few years.
Now, I want to go on the mat with you for a second. Of course, when we think about weightlifting, we think about the country like Georgia and some of the old Eastern European bloc countries being some of the powerhouse of this sport still, with some emerging powerhouses in the world also. I'm talking about New Zealand, these aspects. But when we're talking about 2021 or Tokyo 2020, but especially 2024 in your own country, expectations will be put on the mat for your weightlifters. How is USA, or how did USA Weightlifting rearrange themselves to be competing with the likes of Georgia and other European countries on the mat?
I think in terms of us getting there, the first thing I want to say is historically the U.S. is actually the third most successful country on the planet, behind China and the USSR/Russia in the Olympic Games. But of course, a lot of that success dates back to the 50s, for example, the 56 Olympics, where we won a medal for each person who contested that Olympic Games. However, you're not wrong. We had certainly fallen off from there. To the point where we were, ranked in the 20s coming into the 16 Olympic Games, and we did win one medal there. But there is an expectation, certainly on our side of the house, that we will win 3 or more in Tokyo. And obviously, if we get 2, that's certainly an increase. And 1 is special, but we hope for more. And I think there's a few things that have gone into that. It's just a change of focus in understanding, this is where culture comes into it, that it can be done, that we can win. And we've proven that time and time again. We've had junior world championships, senior world championships, youth world championships. We've won those as a team. We've won those as individuals. We've got more emerging coaches, which I think has really helped us, because one of our previous philosophies was we had a centralized program based in Colorado Springs, Colorado, which had one coach, not a bad coach at all, good coach. But the problem was that the thought process was somewhat that there's one coach that works for every type of athlete. Our philosophy is decentralized training, centralized leadership. So we have Mike Gattone and Pyrrhus Demas who look after the competition strategy and, if you like, provide support for those coaches in the field. There's those coaches in the field that really train the athlete day to day. So each athlete has their own personal coach who they can rely on, who knows them intimately day to day and can concentrate just on the needs of that one athlete. I think that's been a huge change. But we've also put together a very large funding arrangement for those same athletes. That funding arrangement pays them more than any other Olympic sport does in the US from the national governing body. What that does is it allows them to train full-time without worry or without burden of having to work and earn a living. I think the third thing that we did is really increased our recruitment, and you'll see that more in 2024 and 8 than you will do necessarily in 20, not just from us, the national governing body, but in the field. And by the way, having your elite athletes out in the field in different cities across America, I think helps you because, of course, those athletes are attracting people into those gyms. So there's a number of changes we made. Those are some of the basic and more fundamental ones that we made going into this quad. We've also paid more attention to data. We've paid more attention to sports science and the little things that add up to make big differences. One of the models we looked at, and we actually went over there to meet with them, was British cycling, which, of course, they've had some controversy in the last couple of years, but there's still things to be learned from the approach they took. They were in the same position of not being in a good place and rose to a very, very good place. And they looked at every little bit of what they were doing as a high-performance group and said, how can we do this better? And that's the same approach that we've taken at USA Weightlifting to really drive that improvement very quickly. And you're correct. Going into the 2020/2021 Olympics, there's certainly some good feeling about USA Weightlifting and about our athletes. But if we win, the irony is there'll be expectation upon those same athletes and the United States as a whole going into 2024. And by the way, one thing you can learn is by looking at some of those powerhouses like Russia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, and seeing what are they doing really well. And Germany is another one we've learned from. That doesn't mean we take everything that Russia does, or everything that China does, or everything that Kazakhstan does, and so on. But it does mean, well, let's have a look. What can we use from their system? What can we use from what they're doing well and implement over here? So Russia, for example, actually provided some of the basis for our personal coach system. Russia, of course, has had a controversial method of achievement in weightlifting, namely, of course, through doping. But it doesn't mean there isn't good things to take from their program. And certainly the way that they set up their personal coaching system, I think, is one of those.
Fair enough. When you're talking about growing the sport and trying to get that success to build off of, it must be challenging to be the head of the United States sports system. The U.S. is, of course, a global power when it comes to the Olympics. A bronze medal is not going to be heard by the general population there, right? So how do you overcome that challenge of your success, of the rest of the Olympic program's success in the United States to get the attention for what would be a great accomplishment to get on a podium for a program that hasn't been in a while?
I think that the first thing is, looking ahead to Tokyo, is building those relationships and that story with some of our colleagues in the media. and helping them understand, what does it mean if C.J. Cummings wins a medal in the Olympics? Well, the last male medal we had was 1984. So that, and I don't mean to diminish the medal of any athlete in the Olympic Games, but on the spectrum of the U.S. team, that's a perhaps harder medal to achieve than, and I don't want to particularly pick out any sport, but one where, let's use basketball, where we're surely expected to win a medal. And of course, basketball will still get the headlines, so I don't feel too bad for using that one. But that's certainly one where you would expect us to win. And the same is true of, what we're looking at a really successful set of women. We need to tell that story to our colleagues at the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee and help them tell that story onward to NBC and other media carriers, and obviously be active in telling that ourselves, because it is historic. Nobody has really done what we're doing in U.S. sport and turning around a sport so quickly on and off the field. We've doubled our revenue, we've doubled our membership, we've really driven huge reforms and been successful off the field. And I think in the Olympic movement, you're only considered successful on the field at the Olympic Games. And that's what we have to prove. And of course, that allows us the future. Right now, I think the passion is for the barbell. And that's where the grassroots come in. That we have to drive the passion for the actual sport, for putting your hands around a piece of metal and lifting heavy metal above your head 3, 4, 5 times a week. If you're an elite athlete, you're doing that more. But that's where you have to drive the passion for it. And where weightlifting is, and to a degree this plays into powerlifting and CrossFit and strongman and other strength areas, is we are a passionate, almost cult might be the right word, cult group, where it's a very, 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 very passionate group of people who are interested in fitness. That, if you look at Kate and I, or Maddie Rogers, or C.J. Cummings, they have 6 figures of followers on Instagram, for example, all of whom just want nothing more than to see them lift. And I think that speaks to that of it's a small group who follow weightlifting as if you like fans, but it's a very avid group, and that's really to our advantage, because those people talk about weightlifting. They bring people into gyms. They drive that passion for the barbell in a way that you don't necessarily see in some other sports. And that's really, I think, what has really helped us grow as we've grown the infrastructure and the trust in the sport itself. That's helped us grow on the grassroots level, is that word of mouth, passionate ambassadors that we have. And they're bringing the Kate Nyes into the gym. They're bringing in the Jordan Dela Cruzes, the Wes Kitts. These guys have only been lifting for a few years in each case. And a lot of the time, it's because a friend brought them into the gym and showed them weightlifting. And that's going to pay dividends for us in terms of just sheer talent. But also in terms of the amount of people we see at events domestically here in the United States. I'm not sure if that answered your exact question, but hopefully I got close.
Well, fair enough. I'm curious if you sort of turn your attention more globally to the whole sport and trying to grow the popularity of the sport as a whole. You mentioned CrossFit already. Their competitions are quite compelling to watch, the way that they're framed, the YouTube phenomena within it. You can find clips, you can see the events. I look at even sports like the aiming sports, like archery and shooting, how they've changed their formats to make them more TV friendly, the head-to-head in those sports. Is there anything that weightlifting can do to make the presentation better, to make the presentation more exciting, compelling to a clip-based sort of society?
And a couple of things we've done in the US. First of all, weightlifting is done on a single platform for the purist is beautiful, which is exactly what happens at the Olympic Games. What we do here in the US is we do multiple platforms. So for the viewer, there's always something to see. So I think that's the first piece of innovation, is making more of a production of it without changing the sport necessarily in a material fashion. But there are ways that we can look at the way that we produce sport as weightlifting. And a couple of things come right to mind. One is mixed gender competition. I think that's something that's attracted a lot of attention in some of the sports. And certainly something we can easily achieve in weightlifting by applying a point system to men's and women's results. The other thing that I think has been quite successful, not in for want of a better term, official competition, there's something called the Waterpalooza Face-Off that occurs in Miami, Florida each January. And it's actually put on by a weightlifting coach named Spencer Arnold. And it's essentially a tournament style. We call it Face-Off here in the US, and maybe that sounds familiar to others. Basically a head-to-head competition as opposed to, in a tournament fashion, as opposed to a traditional total-based weightlifting competition. And I think coming back to COVID-19, this is providing almost how much should I put this? Almost an experimental room or a laboratory for innovation in not just our sport, but other sports worldwide. I will comment that obviously in the case of our sport, we have issues within our sport to do with doping control, to do with making sure our international federation is working appropriately, that perhaps are slightly further up the priority list in the very near term. But these items, about making weightlifting slightly more understandable or appealing to the audience is certainly something that we need to focus on. And one of the last comments I'll make on that is weightlifting becomes really interesting when there's like a battle for a medal, or when there's a battle to make a world team or a Pan Am team in the US. So one of the issues is when you watch weightlifting, something that we've got to get better at is helping the audience or the viewer understand what's going on. So what does this list really mean? Why did CJ take 142 kilos and not 141 or 143? So, obviously when you have the World Championships on ESPN3 or on ESPN Latin America or on CCTV, your commentators are going to help with that somewhat, and we've identified some really good ones now that do that really well. But in the audience itself, with the graphics and with the production, helping people understand what is going on, what's really interesting about this, I think is a really critical part of how we can move the needle on that particular item in the next 4 years.
Phil,
or should we say 3 after 21? I'm not sure.
Yeah, what's the ethic on that, right? Did we say 3? Did we say 4 with an asterisk? And it's actually 3? Yeah, it's always interesting.
Well, is it a quadrennial or a triennial?
Yeah, no, exactly. At the end of the day, it might be a semester before this whole thing is over. Who knows? But
right.
You were talking, and I had this image in my head, and it's great. And you were talking, oftentimes we'll have weightlifting grab the headline when we have like a head-to-head battle at the end where there's only 2 left battling for gold, and they're challenging each other, and that creates the headline. And we've seen this in athletics world championship over the last couple of years in the pole vault or in the long jump. Those type of events that are similar in a way because the athlete chooses their target and then they go for it and then they challenge each other with that target. And we've seen the rise of charismatic characters and characters that become superstars like Duplantis. Is there a way to highlight these events at the end, to highlight the head-to-head and the challenging of egos when it comes to the few favorites, like you mentioned?
Oh, yeah.
How could we do that to equivalate a sport like pole vault? It's not like pole vault is super popular, but I can ask 1 out of 5 sports fans, and they heard Duplantis. How can we get CJ Cummings to be the next Duplantis or that ideology?
I think it's getting those people out there, and I think, again, it's coming into this Olympic Games and starting to see some success will help that. I think, when we're talking specifically about the U.S., it's a little bit more challenging because of the landscape, but I think it's possible. We have some great personalities, and much as it should be the sporting achievement that drives that, oftentimes it's the personalities and the rivalry. Sometimes it's a sporting rivalry that will really drive that. I'm thinking of the 2 American throwers, Ryan Krauser, and my brain has just emptied of, and I can picture him, the other American who went head-to-head in the finals of the shot put this particular year. Had a fantastic competition against New Zealand. But sometimes it will be that, and we've seen that in weightlifting domestically, where you see Kate Nye and Maddie Rogers go head-to-head, 2 of our most famous and most successful weightlifters, and you'll really see that huge audience come out to watch that. But it's all weightlifting, for want of a better terminology, fans or lifters or coaches, all of whom want to see those guys go head-to-head. But it's explaining that to the masses, and especially to our partners in the media, is the challenge. And similarly, bringing forward some of those personalities of, I think Maddie Rogers has done a fantastic job of bringing her personality out, and I think is probably our best-known athlete in weightlifting, certainly the most popular in the social media world. And bringing out the personalities of Kate and I and CJ, and also one of the issues is how do we help people understand? And we've done different things like this is equivalent to a pool table or 2 washing machines or whatever it is. How do we help people understand the real weight that's actually being lifted? What is, when you watch CJ lift, he kind of makes it look easy. And frankly, it isn't. To lift the weight that CJ is lifting, most people can't pull that weight off the floor, let alone get it over their head. And certainly when they're as light as CJ is. I think those are the challenges that we face, and it all comes down to education and being able to make that easily understood to the audience.
It's fascinating because when you were explaining to explain in layman's term what the weights are, I was brought back to mid-90s, where as a kid, of course, I always been an Olympic fan, but I saw the first strongman competitions on TV. And I saw the Marcus Samuelson. I remember the name. It's been 20 years. And I remember the name because they were like, he's lifting a bus. He's lifting a car. We can relate. We can understand that achievement. And we remember great moments. Maybe we need to send CJ Cummings on Jimmy Kimmel and have him race Jimmy Kimmel and Guillermo at the same time or something like that. We need to talk PR here. But we really appreciate your time. We really appreciate time, Phil. And before we say goodbye, I wanna talk about one thing that to me is fascinating. You've been with USA Weightlifting for multiple years now, over 4 years full, and you've met probably an amazing amount of people that have done impressive feats of strength and impressive feats of performances in front of you. What has impressed you the most, though, since you began your tenure with USA Weightlifting?
And there's quite a number. I think one that really stands out for me was Harrison Morris's youth world record clean and jerk in 2017. And I'm specifically talking about U.S. athletes. His clean and jerk in 2017 to win the bronze medal in the Olympic Games, in the World Championships, which was bringing home our first medal of any sort in the total for almost 20 years to the dot. You're talking a 17-year-old kid doing that at the time up against adults 10, sometimes even nearly 20 years his senior. I was privileged enough to see Harrison's very first weightlifting competition, at least at the national level, and I followed his career the entire way through, both to that medal and now subsequently to the next Olympic Games. And I think that there's been a lot of really fantastic moments for the U.S. team in particular. And there's certainly been some moments outside of that team too, which have been phenomenal feats of strength and competition performances. But that is one that certainly, because of its impact on us as a federation, because of who it was and his age and the fact that it had a youth world record attached to it, I think really perhaps is probably the number one for me.
And that's amazing to me because those are the performances that I remember the most too. Like the first great performances in any sport of an athlete. When you first notice an athlete's name and you remember it, those are moments that can't be beat, regardless of what you do as a fan, as a journalist, or as a CEO of a sport. It is these moments that we do these for. So that was
and you're so right. I mean, that's what we live for. It's, we day to day, our job is to make sure the money's coming through the front door, that we're funding our athletes, that we're sending our teams, that we're doing our governance right. All of those things that go into being the CEO of an Olympic governing body. Let's be clear. What do we really do this for? We do it for that adrenaline rush you feel when you see Harrison Morris winning that medal, when you see Sarah Robles becoming the world champion, when you see Kate Nice at the junior world record, when you see Kate and Maddie going 1-2 for the first time in 28 years. That's the stuff that we do this for, and to support those guys to achieve the very, very, very best that they can, and to, ultimately be the best in the world.
Awesome stuff. Phil Andrews, CEO of USA Weightlifting, General Secretary also. Thank you for your very generous time today. We hope for the best for USA Weightlifting. Maybe not before Canada. Much. Maybe not before Canada Weightlifting, but before anybody else. We're cheering for you also.
Keep an eye on Mao Sharon, my friend. She's got some good chances next year. And Boris and Tavi, too. Canada's sending a strong team.
We will, definitely. Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Thank you to Phil Andrews, CEO of Weightlifting USA, also General Secretary. And Duane, it's fascinating to get to know behind the scene what happened to literally adjust a sport for a national program for a year because of COVID-19, how to generate excitement from your athletes, and all what Phil touched on. And I think it's fascinating also the reasoning why we all do this, right? It's because when we first start working or going into the direction of working in sports, it's not because we're attracted by money, even though we hear about a lot of people making money in sports. Having working in sports for 7 years, it's a very small percentage on top that actually make that money, and the rest of us are below. So it's for the passion, for the love, and for the performances themselves. And it's fun to hear that even the CEOs and the big names in the sports in their own country still remember not the golden medal moments and the moment where glory is there for the millions to see, but sometimes it's when the glory is there for the dozens to see that you get the true sense of the passion.
100%. I mean, yeah, you're paid in glory in sports. That's a joke I've made before, but it's true. The reason we keep doing stuff like this is not for money by any means. There's more, better ways to do that. What I love about this show, we do a lot of podcasts. For those that are our Five Rings only listeners, thank you. But you might be aware that Kevin and I podcast daily on soccer, and do an additional. We do 6 to 7 a week, right? We put out a lot of content. We are content producers, but there's a reason that this is my baby. Five Rings will always be the show that I love the most. It's my passion project. I love the Olympic movement. I love talking to Olympians. I love talking to people that are around the Olympic movement. And it's because of the passion that you heard in Phil's voice and you hear in the athletes that we've had on here before. They're talking about things that they're doing for the love of. Yes, it's an occupation for them in some cases, but as I just said, it's not really where you're going to aim your life's ambitions to, unless you truly have a passion for it and you truly have a passion to excel in it. And that's just something that I've always been attracted to. And I think that, having a 45-minute conversation with a weightlifting executive is something that I cherish. And I think that it's really enjoyable for our listeners. I suspect I tweeted out in the middle of the show when we were here doing the interview. Well, it wasn't live, but when we were doing the interview, I tweeted out that I can't wait to share this with you all, because it really is very much in the wheelhouse of this show. This is what this show exists for, is conversations like that.
And it brought me back to maybe a higher scale. Remember when we talked about racquetball, when we covered smaller sports in the Pan Am game in 2015 or stuff like that? It's easy to talk funds about USA basketball or USA hockey or the big sports or USA track and field, and to talk about that's easy. COVID-19 was for sure affected them, but compared to how a USA Weightlifting, which they get their own funds, they're responsible for their own budget. It's not like they have Olympic USA giving them all their budget, so they're responsible for their own project. And smaller sports in the United States, in Canada, and across the world sometimes work as I would say entities by themselves, like autonomous entities, some of them that are affiliated, yes, and get some grants and funds or tax credits in some points, which is not even real money. It's just you don't have to pay us money, so you're saving costs. But there is a something to be said about autonomous entities like USA Weightlifting, like others that I could mention. I don't want to forget anyone, so I'm not going to just start naming any, that were able to find ways to being just staying afloat. And it's crazy when you think about it too. Weightlifting, all the gyms being closed, and the growth that is not happening right now for memberships, and all of these reasons, which membership fees are probably a big aspect of their budget for USA Weightlifting. The ramifications go really deep when you think about it. Kind of like also when he mentioned how this situation has forced to re-examine how weightlifting as a whole does things, and to enter the virtual world and the online competitions and that aspect of today's world mixed with weightlifting. If there's a sport that I wouldn't think that would have taken advantage of this, is probably weightlifting, and they found ways to do so. Online competitions, you can find ways, and if you have equipment that have been, we can certify that those are actual weights. We can see with the video that it's a real company. It's not just you who painted plaster and raising on a barbell, which that's what I would try to do because I ain't strong. I think that's really fun, really cool, and it brings the sport to a new level. And of course, it is a sport, like we mentioned, that has a troubled past, and I don't think it has to be hidden and forgotten about, because if you want to highlight how you're doing things great now, you actually have to tell and be transparent on how you make mistakes in the past.
Well, yeah, I think one of the themes of Five Rings over the years is that we've leaned into PED conversations. You have to, if you love amateur sport, if you love amateur sport's the wrong way, but if you love Olympic sport, that genre, you have to embrace it. And if you're in weightlifting, you absolutely have to face it head on. It is a big challenge for any sport that relies on power. And there is really no sport that is more geared towards relying on power and agility. And weightlifting is an incredible athletic achievement, what they do out there. And it does rely a lot on that ability to get that dynamic, powerful bursts of energy that, bluntly, PEDs lend themselves to letting you train for, especially the recovery stuff aspect of it. If you don't address that, if you don't lean in, if you're not clear in your messaging about clean sport, well, you run the risk of that sport being kicked off of the Olympic platform. That's the bottom line, and that's what I think that anyone in that sport realizes and has to really get that message home. They keep getting testing. They keep getting positives in the Olympics. What is in it for the Olympic movement at that point if it's nothing but negative news? And then you got other sports that touch on similar things. We talked about CrossFit quite a bit in there. Within the weightlifting world, they had called the CrossFit Effect. It really has helped people get to this sport. It makes sense. You join CrossFit for the community around it, for the physical benefits around it, and there's no doubt that there are CrossFit competitions, which they're terrifying to watch. Actually, those people are incredible athletes. How they do it, but
those people will be the one that saves us from the zombies. Like, it'll be the CrossFitters that kill all the zombies and save us from the COVID zombies. That's how the world's going to be saved. It's not hydrochloroquine. It's CrossFit people with machete.
Yeah, maybe perhaps they're great athletes. Is the point I'm making, but. So if you're the Olympic movement and you keep getting positive tests within the weightlifting world, well, maybe you go, just bring CrossFit in instead. Well, I'd rather have it as well. That would be my preference. But, you need to clean sport out. And I'm glad that he didn't shy away from those questions. I do think that there are challenges to make the sport more compelling. That's the basis of my final question to him, to make it more interesting. I always lean back onto Kevin. We talked about shooting and archery before on this show. In terms of what they've done on TV, I go out and watch one of those things now. You can have all the World Cups on YouTube. Watch one. They actually are interesting to watch, and it's because of that head-to-head. So I would think, and I would imagine it's true, that weightlifting will look to ways to make it more of a competition that is compelling to the average eyes. But as Phil said in the interview, there are a lot of purists within that sport that love the sport, that will want to maintain aspects of the old ways too, and that's always the challenge when you're trying to modernize for TV.
Oh, it is, and you got me thinking, and maybe that's a good place where we can finish this show. But we just want to address, it's our first show in a while. I think both Duane and I felt a bit depressed with the postponement of the Olympics, and this summer was going to be a really busy summer. It kind of turned out to be still a busy summer for us, but it wasn't on the Olympic side, unfortunately. And right now, since last Thursday, when it was the 24th, and the real opening of the Olympic Games that was supposed to happen. We've been a little sad, and we have this opportunity to talk to Phil Andrews, and we thought it was a good time to bring a show back. We're not guaranteeing we'll be back every couple of weeks or whatever the case may be. We'll be back when we feel we can openly talk about our feelings about this, because we're not going to lie. It is something that both Duane and I plan years ahead, almost our lives around. Like, I planned my wedding last year because I knew there wasn't any Olympics last year, right? So things like this. And it is, for us, it was not a hard decisions that we didn't take it hard, but we were sad for multiple reasons, for the athletes, for whatever the case may be. And we're getting out of there slowly but surely. But when you talk about modernizing the sport, sometimes it's not even the sport. Sometimes it's not the content that you really want to change. It's the container, so the content can be appreciated better. And when you think about weightlifting, you think of the white gymnasium, or the white, really super bright gymnasium with the people watching, and the beep and the beeps and the colors of the weight lifted. But when you watch fencing with the darkness of the crowd and the lighting and stuff, I think there's something to be made. I think there's something to do without changing the actual sport itself. Change how it's filmed. Change how it's shot. You want to make a product for TV, like the Olympics always say they're becoming. Well, darken the crowd. The crowd's in darkness and the light is on the mat, and you focus on the athlete, and you focus that way. And I think with graphics now, there'll be ways to equivalate. Like, okay, you put the images of three refrigerators on the screen, like, this is the weight that he's raising right now. And you can even have maybe a refrigerator company brand it and give you money for the graphics that you put on the screen of the 3 refrigerators, and you first found yourself a new revenue stream. I think there's ways to better the coverage and better the container without having to change the nature of the content.
No, for sure. Yeah. I mean, in 2015, when in the city I'm in, weightlifting was one of the sports that I sampled. I mean, I went to 20 events, so there was a lot of them that I sampled. And what really came off live is how powerful it is, how incredibly heavy what they're lifting is. You just don't get that on TV. So anything they can do to try and convey that will impress people and will draw more people in. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a change in the structure of the event. Look, all of these sports are battling for the same eyeballs, but we are now living in a world where people have choice. And, I mentioned a couple times already in the show how you can watch, World Cup archery events on YouTube. Well, you could probably watch World Cup weightlifting events on YouTube too. So they're just make the content compelling, and the eyeballs will find it. And that's, I think, what the challenge of any of these organizations are. But just to finish it real quick on what he has done in that culture. If you don't know the story leading in, there was a controversy amongst one of their lifters who had tested positive for a PED, had served a 2-year ban, was not participating in the out of competition testing leading to this, was ultimately named to one of their teams, even though she had not been part of the testing protocols leading up to that. The claim was that she was clean, that she was doing testing on her own, and that this had been monitored. We don't want to rehab that too much, but it was a controversial decision. We'll just say that. And there was a lot of sort of distrust in the weightlifting world. They brought Mr. Andrews in, and he has made it, a quite successful organization in those times. It has been a good run for him. There has been a lot of those cultural problems and concerns that existed before him have been, you never want to say that they're completely gone in any case, but certainly the picture is rosy, and that's to say nothing of the podium changes, of the scoreboard changes, which does see USA weightlifting now contending for medals at world events, which was a new thing for them. Well, it's a new old thing because, as he said, he was very successful in the early days. But, you mentioned like the last medal for the men's side on USA weightlifting back in 1984. Well, there's even an asterisk on that because where's the power of weightlifting?
Yeah, it comes where I said, the old Eastern European bloc, which is still the case today. There's others powers that are coming, but yeah, exactly. And I think it's a good story also, because I think it's a good microcosm maybe of the macrocosm of most Olympic sports right now and how most Olympic sports are not the most popular one and are struggling on a day-to-day basis to get the sponsorship that they're looking for, to get the money that they need. And I think this is a good microcosm of maybe all the realities. Of course, there's going to be specificities in all the different sports and how things are different, but as a whole, I think it gives us a good example on how individual sports authorities or national sports entities are dealing with COVID-19 also.
Fair enough. Real quickly, you mentioned the frequency of the show before we wrap. I just want to address it real quick. As I said, this show is my baby. It will never completely go away. It does not have a regular schedule right now in our program because of our commitments on the other side of it, but I will commit to you that as long as the Olympics continue on, the show will continue on. And you can be assured that once we know for sure or have a reasonable expectation that 2021 will indeed happen, we'll start cranking those previews out, which are one of my favorite things to do every 2 years. I'm going to have to do them 2 years in a row this time. But that's the winter ones are fine. The winter half the games.
Exactly. And on that note, you can follow Duane on social media at 24th Minutes, myself at Kev Laramée, and this show at Five Rings Podcast. You can find the podcast version on our website, sportspodcastingnetwork.com, and on the Five Rings Podcast feed, which you can find on every podcatcher out there. If you don't find it, let us know. We will add it to your favorite podcatcher. On that note, thank you to USA Weightlifting and to Phil Andrews for their time today. And until next time, yes, have a great podium for sure. Enjoy your amateur sports, enjoy your Olympic sports, enjoy your sports. And also, just have a good summer.